Second Northern New England Tableau User Group. I'm Bruce Ottomano, and I'll be moderating today. The purpose of gathering is to share knowledge, tips and tricks, and connect with other Tableau users in the Northern New England area. And whether you're a beginner, a wizard, or just curious, you are welcome. So here we are in year 2 of the pandemic, and I'm excited to be part of the virtual Northern New England Tableau User Group to bring the community together so we can meet virtually and exchange ideas virtually using the latest modern technologies. For today's Tableau User Group, this is the agenda we're going to walk through. We're going to spend an hour right now on Tableau Conference Roundtable. So Jonathan Drummey will be coordinating the roundtable and sharing tips and tricks and lessons learned and all the exciting things that were shared by Tableau at this year's conference. Next, at 10 o'clock, we have an exciting speaker from Tableau Research. Sarah Battersby is a Tableau research scientist, and she's going to talk about visual analytics and spatial calculations. And so we're very excited to have Sarah as a special guest speaker from Tableau. And then 11 o'clock, we'll be moving to breakout rooms just for mixing and mingling. And you'll notice there are tables with some names associated with them. So I'd like to encourage you all to consider joining a breakout room to mix and mingle at a table of your choice. So with that, as a backdrop, I'd love to turn it over to you, Jonathan.
Okay. All right. Let me share my screen. And switch to presentation mode here. All right, so we're going to do a roundtable discussion. So we're going to start out and have each of our folks on the call. Tyler unfortunately got called into a meeting, so he will hopefully be joining us later. But we're just going to present for a couple minutes on takeaways from the Tableau Conference 21 that happened in November. And then I've got a few questions that will pop out to the group and have a discussion. So with that, we're going to start out with Janelle.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. So just to give you a little background of myself, I'm Janelle Green. So I work for Rapid7 as a Tableau lead. So when I went to the Tableau conference, this specific session really stood out to me as I'm helping train up different users on Tableau. So the session was Bland to Bold, Dashboarding Tips from Professional Graphic Designers. So at a high level, the session talked about just different design tips and the process of creating a dashboard. So we'll go through, you are the architect, you start with a blueprint, consider your guests, and collaborating throughout your Tableau dashboard build. So if you go to the next. So to hit on the you are the architect a little bit more, you want to start your dashboard build by really empathizing with your key stakeholders. You want to really understand the business case and what they're trying to accomplish. You also want to start brainstorming and sketching out your idea. So what I'm finding is a lot of people might feel intimidated by starting with a blank canvas in Tableau, but take a step back, start drawing it out, just getting a rough sketch of what you want it to look like. And then dive into Tableau with a prototype. Just throw some ideas out there. Don't feel like you have to come to the end conclusion right away, but rather give your end user multiple options that they could choose from. And then once you have a rough dashboard, start testing it. Give it to a few stakeholders, let them test it out, see how they navigate through your dashboard, collect that feedback, and make iterations throughout. And then lastly, implement the final dashboard and publish it. So next slide. So looking at the blueprint, there's a few different elements that you want to consider. Oh, sorry, Jonathan, can you go to the next slide? I think you went one back. Perfect, thank you.
It keeps on going backwards on me, sorry.
Oh, that's weird. No worries. So looking at
we
the okay, cool. Looking at the blueprint, you want to look at the hierarchy. So you don't want your user kind of jumping around on your screen. You want them to have a certain flow from like the top of your screen down. So adjust your visual to allow for a smooth transition throughout it. And consistency and scale. Be consistent with your colors, your font sizes. You don't want to have like 5 different color palettes that the user has to keep referencing the legend for, because each one is different. So try to stay consistent across your whole visual. And then finally, the white space. You can see in this screenshot here, notice how there's like smaller white space across the top, like 5 icons. So those kind of all fit together. But then each visual below it has more white space in between. So it's almost, I like to compare this to like reading a book. If a book had absolutely no line space or paragraph indentation, it would make it much like trickier to read. So the next piece is considering your guest is crucial. So if you go to the next slide. So this whole session, they always compared it to building a house. So considering your guest, not every single person wants the same style house, right? Some people might want a more modern home, something more colorful, or like a rustic cabin. So consider your audience and what they would personally prefer in that design. And then lastly, on the next slide, it takes collaboration. So don't go into a Tableau dashboard assuming that you're the only one building it. Make sure to like ask other people's thoughts, get your whole team involved. There's probably going to be an analyst, a data engineer to get you the data that you need to develop it, and definitely the stakeholders involved as well. So I went through that pretty quick. I did include the session link on one of the earlier slides. So I highly recommend watching the session if you haven't yet.
Could you paste that into the chat, Janelle?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks. So I'm going to go next, and I'm going to talk about web authoring. And I'm actually going to open up this view here to show this. So I'm somebody where when Tableau came out with web authoring initially, I'm like, oh, that's cool, but it's kind of a toy. And that it didn't really do much to compare to what we could do in Tableau Desktop. And when it still comes to formatting things on the analytics pane on this visualization, which the folks at the Information Lab maintain as a comparison, we can see there's still a lot of red X's on here where web edit isn't there. But as we scroll down the list over the years, there's an awful lot of green check marks under that web edit column where it's getting really close to same with Tableau Desktop. And at the conference, Tableau committed to having web edit be equivalent to Tableau Desktop by the end of 2022. And I'm not going to hold my breath for that, because they had committed to that back in 2015 or 2016, that it would be same, and it obviously isn't. So they may not get there, but they're closer than they've ever been. And I've been using web edit more and have been pleasantly surprised about how much it can do and what it can do for me. So with web edit now, we can create workbooks, we can author flows. That was added in version 2020.4. We can create published data sources from scratch and also edit published data sources online now. And then there's virtual connections, which were introduced in 2021.4 that Nara is going to talk about. So as an authoring environment, we can do all of the basic things in here. And when we're connecting to data, if you've used web edit before, like you'd have like on this site, you can connect to published data sources, and that's pretty much it. And so here's a batch of published data sources at Path. with some blinded out. But then in this content type of things we can connect to the virtual connections, databases and files, and also the tables that are used in different views. And this has been something I've been using where there's some data that's out there and I forget exactly which table it's in, but I know it was used in a view and I can go to directly that from web edit. Whereas in Tableau Desktop, we're connecting to the data source and who knows what we're going to get, kind of thing. So this is one of the nice things in web edit. So as far as use cases for what I use it for and kind of my process of how I dip my toes into using web edit, where I started was kind of minor fixes and edits. So I've hit publish on a dashboard and then somebody says, oh, the spacing's a little off on something, or some calculation needs a minor change. So being able to do that, not having to download and republish in desktop is great. And then being able to do this with published data sources and the time saved when I have a data source that is tens or hundreds of megabytes in size, to have to download that to my machine and then re-upload it with the extract, and I can just do that online is great. Being able to do quick visual analytics, like that kind of question of, hey, Jonathan, how much was this measure for this dimension in this period? So that kind of being able to just pop into web edit and do that is really handy. And then starting workbooks, I still run into minor things with formatting, or there's some ways where my mouse memory in desktop makes me want to do something, and web edit doesn't work quite that way. So like tab completion in the calculation editor works just a little differently, but it's really close. And also another piece here, I mentioned this as far as connecting to fields and tables, being able to leverage the drivers that we've already installed on our Tableau server instance, and not have to deal with that. I just got a new laptop and it took me days to be able to reconnect to everything. And there were times when I had to get my regular work done, and being able to just pop into web edit and connect to something was really useful. And then with 2021.4, being able to do published data sources is really huge, because we really try to use published data sources as a single source of truth for our visualizations in Tableau. So that really kind of puts web edit over a hump for me. So if you haven't been using web edit, I urge you to check it out. So with that, we're going to switch to Lucy.
Hey everyone, good morning. I'm Lucy Green. I work at IDEX. My title is Data Visualization Designer Manager, and I create tools that provide actionable insight with the huge amount of data that IDEX has available. We're a veterinary diagnostic company, for anyone who doesn't know. So our metrics both go to the field and to the sales field, also front-facing users, so that's our customer, and also reporting up to the C-suite. So the problems that I am trying to solve always are the complexity of data. Henry and I were just talking about this. Everyone wants to show their data, but then to agree what the data means, I know that we're all in the same field here, so we can all empathize with this. And not only that, but what is the actual insight that one can take to change the actions, to change the outcome? So Jonathan, for the next slide, so for this conference, these were the talks that I found really inspiring. Moving Beyond Pretty by Luke Beacon was really great. That's sort of the like agitating buzzword, is making it pretty. There's data, because we know that making something clear can also make it pretty, but also, again, what you're guiding toward is that insight that creates action and a consistent, clear action. So he spoke about some really exciting buzz points, and one was progressive disclosure, and Janelle tapped on that. You know, that the data, you know, you get your big hit insights and then you move to your smaller levels of detail. But then, so then he moved to Doherty threshold, which is, you know, fast load time is essential to keep people's focus. And then he mentioned Jacob's law, which I've heard a lot about, but I just thought it was discussed really beautifully. And that is that the majority of people who ingest data are used to seeing data on apps, etc. So build your dashboards in line with the gestalt that you're used to using, and your users understand, therefore, the UX therein. So in other words, you know, the scrollability and looking for the big hit KPIs is a way that everyone's used to ingesting their data now. So you get inspiration from Tableau Public and common apps and build those right into your dashboard, because that is the way your users are used to thinking about data as well. There were other sort of neat points, but I really recommend that talk for UX as much as sort of front end inspiration. And then, of course, 2021 Devs on Stage. That's always an exciting place to be, and it's hard to remember that that's what's coming up and that's not what's here just yet, which is a tension that it's hard to live with. But the exciting things, I think, were visualization extensions, which I'm a little skeptical of, but I can't wait to see, which are drag and drop viz types like flowers, etc. So it takes us a little closer to getting some of those really beautiful vizzes without having to sort of like deconstruct and reinvent. And I hope it works the way they're purporting it to work. But the one that I thought was really interesting was dynamic dashboard layouts. So we're used to dragging and popping a lot of our fields so that we can show pertinent information. But the dynamic dashboard layouts will make parameters changeable so that quite easily you'll be able to regress to different levels of detail. So that was really exciting. Can't wait to see how that one works. And then the other exciting from that, which I looking at the whole 2021 Devs on Stage if you haven't seen it, but this workbook optimizer. So actually I'll hit on that a little bit later. So the next talk that I thought was great was Make It Better, the Furlage twins. They do, you know, it's like in the vein of Makeover Monday, but they use transparent shapes in a really neat way. They use max window to show the overlying range of some bar charts. And they just sort of whip through some really neat techniques that clean up your front end to make that insight a lot more clear. So that's a good hit if you're looking for quick makeover fixes. And then I didn't list it on here, but the Tableau Zen Masters, really great. So in particular, in part 1 at minute 8:52, Jeff Schaefer, who wrote the big book of Tableau dashboards, does like some really neat tips in 2 minutes. So that one's great to check out. Our own Jonathan Drummy here gives a really good inspiration, creating tools for decision making, which I thought was great. Thank you for that, Jonathan. And then the Furlash twins get back on at minute 16 of part 1, and then and give other really cool, really fast insights on front end. Part 2, Mark Reed does 5 ways to use images in Tableau, which was refreshing and exciting. And then minute 13:22, Stoshi Ganetto does like a hide tooltips over total, which is pretty cool. And then, and then I got into the Furlash twins, and this is not this conference specific, but they go into their top 10 all time in Tableau Public. So that brings us to sort of the inspiration that is Tableau Public, back to inspiration that is apps, etc. And then making things like many of us on this call make, I make data heavy dashboards that are not discrete data sets. They're constantly being updated with large data. So I have to future proof, and I don't have the room sometimes to use these beautiful inspirations, but nonetheless, those inspirations I think are really important. And so it was exciting to go through these top 10 to remind yourself what the possibilities are, and then also that the clean design and beauty is really, really effective and important, even in these, very data heavy, very quick hit KPI takeaways. Yeah, and it was a great conference. I will put all those links in the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy.
Sure.
And Nar is back just in time to do his presentation.
All right. So are you sharing it already, Jonathan?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, it's okay. Can you go to the first slide? I think there's one more slide, right? Or it's not there. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about Tableau connections today. Especially there is this new feature which they've been talking about for a while, and finally it was introduced in the very recent Tableau in 2021.4. It's called virtual connections, or Tableau always have their, they call it VCons, like how they call visuals as Viz, and all those things. So my name is Nara. I work at Green Mountain Power. I handle a lot of data and analytics with my small team, who's all there in this conference today. So as you all know, like Tableau has all this connection offering they have, like it can connect to so many different data sources, and the list keeps on growing. We, in our practices in data and analytics in Green Mountain Power, our workbooks connect to minimum of one of these live data sources, and a maximum it can go until 4 or 5 data sources combined together. So there is problems in using all these data connections. It's amazing that we can connect to so many things. So Jonathan, if you can go to the next slide, and then like just click once. So one of the biggest problem is we need to whoever wants to like create their visualization, we need to give them the credentials for our databases. And then like we need to provide them with this database string, or sometime like say like a cloud database string and stuff, and they might not be technical enough to like feed into the Tableau wizards, and they finally end up using an Excel spreadsheet as the data source and create their own wizards. That's what they end up doing. And if it is like a bigger organization, and if you have a lot of security things going on in your organization, you're not supposed to share your database credentials, which has access to all the data sources. So we end up creating some Kerberos security at the AD level and things, restricting access to data, which causes more issues in accessing the data. And users are never happy with it. And most of the time, the biggest limitation is only few users have access to all the data sources using their admin username and password, and they're not supposed to share it. And they're the ones who will be ending up creating your visualization, and they have no idea how to create visualization sometimes. So that's the biggest problem. And most of all, the biggest problem is the maintenance nightmare. So in a lot of IT organization, like you have this password rotation policy, like where you need to change the database passwords, like monthly ones or 6 months ones. So if an admin leaving an organization, you will have to end up changing all the passwords as well. And a lot of times you end up doing upgrades and some updates where you have to like change your server name or service names. And every time you do it today in Tableau, you'll have to go to every data source that's there. Like it can be in every workbook or a data flow or wherever, and you have to manually update it at the server. Sometimes you even end up doing republishing the old dashboard if it is a lot more complicated data source that we use, like connecting several data sources together. That's even more painful. So it's not fun. And at Green Mountain Power, we actually did in the last 1 year, we had to do this thing like 2 to 3 times already with our Exadata migration and Hadoop migrations and stuff. So it wasn't fun at all. So what did Tableau do right now is they came up with this virtual connections, which I'm excited for. It just like simplifies sharing access to the data. So what I think Jonathan showed it a bit. So you basically create a virtual connection right in the Tableau server. And from there, any of your analyst or a content creator can actually connect to that virtual connection rather than wanting to getting that password and username and admin credentials and all those things, right? Like we do today. I'm excited for it. I want to try this thing, but we couldn't upgrade our environment right away. But this will only get better soon. So if we can go to the next slide, Jonathan, I'll just walk you through like how it's done. So you just need to go to server and create that new virtual connection, and you pick your own data source, whichever it is. In this case, the demo is on the MySQL. You put in the username and password. This is all done right at the server or in the Tableau online level, so it doesn't have to be done at the workbook. And you can pick the schema that you want to give access and pick all the tables, or even put a custom SQL query there and publish this data source to a project where you want to share this data source to. And that's it. Once it's published, it can now be accessed by any analyst who wants to connect to a data source. So if you can go to the next slide, Jonathan. So as a content creator now, they can basically go and create a new workbook. It can be from the server, like a web authoring way, or it can also be done from a Tableau desktop. Connect to the Tableau server and kind of pick the virtual connection that's been created, and they can connect directly without needing to put in anything. They don't even need to know like what kind of server that's running behind the scene. This will be a big change to Tableau, which is surprising. They did not think about it until now, and finally it made it out in 2021.4. And it's going to be a big thing. We also tried using this TNS names. It really didn't work very well for so many different connections that we use at the Green Mountain Power. So hopefully we will leverage this thing a lot more in the future. And the biggest help for the server-side maintenance when there is a password change or something. So Jonathan, if you can go to the next slide. They just made it so simplified now. You can just go to the server and go to that virtual connection and edit the connection and change the password right here and just republish it. And that's it. Any workbooks or data sources using this connection will all be updated with the new password now. It's as simple as that. You don't have to go to individual thing and republish it and change the data sources. And that's the main thing I would like to share. And this is a new feature which is already out there in 2021.4. If you guys are struggling just like us, we should all try this thing and see if it's going to make our life simpler. So in summary, we can go to the next slide, Jonathan. So it's going to basically make data owners' life much simple, like data owners in the sense like a DBAs, like data stewards, or Tableau server administrators. So they can easily create a virtual connections, and it'll be more flexible for them in the future. And most of all, they also introduced a lot of security features along with this thing, which is another big topic all by itself. what Tableau has done is now the connections are managed right in the Tableau server. You can actually set up security profiles for all those connections. So if you don't want everyone to have access to it, you can basically, if you have groups in Tableau server that's already set up, you can assign certain groups to have access to the connections. So not all can basically connect to it and stuff. So you don't have to worry about the security at the DBA level and stuff. It can all be handled right inside the Tableau server, which is pretty cool as well. For creators and explorers, they can basically use these virtual connections directly, and they don't have to worry about JDBC string and the data passwords and stuff. Like when in Green Mountain Power, like our analyst, like basically have the same issue. Hey, what is the new thing now? Like, did the service name changed, or did we do something? It's broken on my side, and all those things. They don't have to worry about any of those things. It'll just work. And the last, the viewers. So Jonathan, one more click, please. The viewers, they won't see any change. They'll be just happy that data owners are happy and creators are happy as well, I guess. That's all I had.
Okay. We had one question from Brenda that came up, which for virtual connections, and that was, is this for data only in the cloud, or can you do this if you have data on-prem?
It's for everything, because in the example that's been shown there, it's actually a MySQL server. So it's for every connection that Tableau has to offer. You can actually create a virtual connection now. So yeah, so it's pretty cool. Like, so you can create a week on MySQL, week on Hadoop, week on Oracle, and it should work for everything.
Oh, and does that work with Tableau Bridge for Tableau Online users?
Exactly, yeah. So for Tableau Online, that's a catch. You will have to create the Tableau Bridge for this VCon, and it should work. So
great.
So the interesting thing which I would like to try, which I still didn't put my hand on it yet, is giving access to put their own SQL connection will be much better, because wherever I read about it, or even or there's a YouTube videos on this thing, they always talk about sharing tables, which is good. Analysts can still make the joins and stuff right in the Tableau desktop and stuff, but it'll be better even if they can create their own SQL. So I'll have to try it out to see if it's going to work like that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, Nara. And thanks, Janelle and Lucy. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and we're going to go to our roundtable discussion. So I've got a few questions for everybody in another window. And if you have questions that you would like us to answer, please toss them in the chat as well. So what do I want to start out with? So let's, since it was just the Tableau Conference 21 and you mentioned devs on stage, Lucy, what is your favorite new feature from the past year or so, or something that was announced at TC21? And I'll start out with Janelle.
That's a tricky question. There's just so many. I would say two different ones for me. We haven't gotten a chance to test out the virtual connections, but that's definitely one that I'm really excited to get into. I think within our company, we are trying to implement security, and I'm hoping we can start leveraging those virtual connections to help with that. So that's definitely one. The other one that I just discovered was on web edit. I believe you can now copy paste dashboards from other workbooks. So we have a lot of our users on web edit that don't have desktop. So having that feature available just on the web will be huge as well.
Okay. And how about you, Nara?
Oh yeah, obviously the virtual connection is a big thing. We want to definitely get an hands on. But there is a catch to it though, like they do sell it separately. I would like to point that thing out. If you just own a Tableau server, it's not part of it. They sell it as a data management add-on, which wasn't fancy before. Earlier they had the data management add-on. It was never impressive. And now with this thing, it's at least getting my attention to it. So with the virtual connects. The other things which I liked from Tableau conference, obviously this is the first time with Salesforce owning Tableau, they're conducting this thing. So I'm more interested in the Tableau CRM that they're talking about, which is a direct connect to Salesforce. Within Salesforce, they're going to do some of the Tableau visualization, which is pretty cool. But I'm yet to see in person how it's going to work and stuff. The other thing is they have this, the business science is what Tableau calls it, business science, which is basically an Einstein integration within Tableau, which again, I'm yet to see. It'll be pretty interesting for some of the data science use cases and things. It's basically Salesforce with Tableau will be a very good thing to see for the future.
All right. And you, Lucy?
Yeah, I want to dovetail off business science, but actually the most, I didn't get into it too deeply, but that workbook optimizer I think is really exciting. There's this Tableau white paper about how to optimize your dashboards for performance, and I built this whole cheat sheet from it years ago, and it's got such small idiosyncrasies that you'd never expect. You know, count D is very expensive time-wise, et cetera. There's a lot of processing bits. And so I can't wait for that optimizer to see if that really just proceduralizes all of these tips. So that's sort of it's a boring shout out, but it could make an enormous difference for those of us with huge data heavy dashboards. But then what Nara was saying, so they've explained data, explained the viz, share the data, all these sort of like ask data components. And that marries eventually with the Einstein business intelligence. So I also feel a little skeptical because I just don't think it's there yet, but I'm pleased with the momentum toward AI sort of pointing to and answering some of our summary questions. And when those are vital, it's going to be.
Yep. Yeah, for me, the virtual connections and row level security is interesting. That's something that every project where they start out demanding it, I push back against it because it just adds so much overhead. And I'm hoping I'm going to be testing it out in the next few weeks to see what's up with that. Also for me, the viz extensions, it's something I've thought a long time that we shouldn't have to have a degree in table calculations to make a Sankey chart, for example. And to be able for users to be able to start doing those things without that will be huge. And then the other thing for me is the Tableau Exchange, I think has a lot that in some ways it's combining the dashboard accelerators that they've already had for a while, and the dashboard extensions, but then to have data sets available that people can plug into. And where in my work in public health, there's things like population data sets that people have to go out and hunt and find. And if there's a Tableau ready data set that somebody can connect to and plug in, that'll be really fantastic. So I'm looking forward to where that goes. And enabling more of the whole Tableau ecosystem. So we talked some about Salesforce and Einstein and everything. So my next question, we're a couple of years into Tableau owning Salesforce. Now they own Slack as well. Salesforce owning Tableau and now Slack. And with Einstein. So is the marriage a good match so far? And let's start out with Nara this time.
I think from analytics perspective, it's definitely a very good match because Salesforce was already doing a lot of analytics within their Salesforce framework. And they've been owning MuleSoft for a while on the data integration side, which is a good match there as well for the API builders and stuff. It is definitely a good thing. So far, we didn't have like from the account perspective too, like for Green Mountain Power, we didn't have like, hey, we Salesforce is on, like we're going to hike up the price and stuff. Like they don't have anything. It looks like Tableau seems to be running independently all by itself, which is also very good. And now when I see all these integrations getting in play, like I just want to get handle more on Salesforce to make it better, because today we do have a Salesforce dashboard. Like one of our analysts, Sue, like she's in this meeting, so she built a lot of Salesforce dashboards in Tableau. We need to do a daily refresh of it because it's not a live connect. Maybe in the conference they did talk about like a live connect to Salesforce and things. If those things happen, it will be pretty interesting for all of our dashboard to see like issues with opportunity and problems with how we connect with our customers and things can be seen in a live format, rather than people going to Salesforce to see it. They can all see from the analytics perspective, maybe send alert emails and things to them. So that'll be a big game changer there, I guess. But only like time will tell. Like I do see some Salesforce. They do say Tableau is all by itself, but now I'm seeing some Salesforce interference there, with from the reps perspective and stuff. So we'll see. So far, it's good.
How about you, Lucy?
Yeah, the thing that we tag a lot of our Tableau dashboards that then represent in the My Territory space in Salesforce, and there's such a limited aspect ratio. It drives you insane. They're very tiny, sort of to put dashboards there. Forward to more integration, and they keep saying that will blown up. All of those confines will be blown up. I haven't found any limitation. I think it would be great. And Nara hit on most of the points. Will be exciting, and that data back and forth flow. And there's a lot to Einstein, but I'm pleased to see that they're not throwing Tableau under the bus for the Einstein analytics for Tableau CRM. They're maintaining the robust Tableau product. So that was a worry, and that doesn't seem to be happening, which is great.
Okay. I'll jump in and then do you, Janelle. So for me, one thing with some of the Einstein stuff they've showed off, that becomes, at least right now, the pricing for it it's another add-on. So when you start looking at cost of deployment and data manager and server manager and Einstein, all these add-ons, I'm not so excited about that. And the other piece for me with some of the Einstein stuff is your data has to be in Salesforce. And we have data we're a global organization, and we have data that we can our environment into Salesforce without extra agreements and everything. So I'm hoping they allow more to happen within our environment. So on the whole, I've been kind of reading the tea leaves to see what's going on. There were a number of development departures at Tableau this past year where I'm guessing a bunch of stock options vested and people left. So I'm kind of curious what we're going to see in the next year or two from people. Are we going to continue seeing new things or not? So that's my take. How about you, Janelle?
Yeah, I think you guys said it really well, and I think I'm hopeful that with the integration, it'll only get more and more convenient as they continue to develop different features with that. Mm-hmm. I have to say, with the Slack integration, I have a few coworkers listening in, so you guys should plug your ears here, but our company is very Slack heavy. We pretty much only use Slack. So we haven't implemented it quite yet. I've been keeping it fairly quiet that you can integrate Tableau into Slack, but it's until we get the time to actually add it. But I'm really excited to eventually get that up and running. And by the time we get to it, hopefully there'll be even more features around it as well.
Yep. Yeah, and Tableau, for all of those like me who are in an organization that uses Teams, Tableau does plan on doing the same things for Teams. It's just where Slack is a Salesforce company, it's a natural first one to do.
Oh, that's good to hear. I hadn't heard that. That's great.
Yep. So next question actually came out of the meeting at the beginning. So Tableau certifications, are they worth it or not? And let's start with you, Janelle.
Oof. That I feel like could be highly debated. I did get my certification quite a few years ago. At this point, it's definitely been expired. I'm more curious. I know they just released the data analyst certification, which is fairly new. I thought they were going through more updates. I would be curious to know if those updates have gone through on the certification and if they've like restructured it more. But to answer the initial question, I think they could be valuable. I think it's, if anything, it's a good learning experience because it finds the places in Tableau that you may not be as knowledgeable about.
And I'm with you, Janelle, on that. I guess the one other thing for me when I'm looking at candidates is I'm more interested in seeing proof of work as far as visualizations that they've built, and how they talk about the data pipelines and how they supported that visualization, how they supported their users, than the certification itself. Let's go to you, Lucy.
Yeah, I can dovetail on that because I totally agree with you, Jonathan. I think though, if you're looking for a career shift, then it's a great tool to do that. So if you want to get into more of the viz side from the analytics side or onto the server side, then if you use it as a tool to then create a lot of your own work that you can show, then it's valuable. But no, as far as a resume is concerned, that doesn't pique my interest. It's the work that's come of it.
And you, Nara?
Oh, I got to go with Lucy there. Yeah. So I don't look for Tableau certification in general because as long as they have experience building a lot of cool stuff, it's pretty good. Like talking about the Iron Viz from last year. What's his name? Some Indian dude, Pradeep, right? Yeah. So
Amazing. Yeah, amazing.
yeah, amazing stuff. Right?
I'll put that in the chat.
So that's what we look for. Like, yeah, if you just go around and look into the Tableau public, and you can see all these people now. And talking about it now, they have this new "Hire Me" button now. You can hire someone directly from there, which is pretty cool. So that's what plays a bigger role because things change so much. I don't know how much we can really keep up with all the certifications, right? Maybe every year people need to be recertified is what I'm thinking. So
yeah, I just put 3 really inspiring people from Tableau Public into the chat.
Great. Thanks. So next, potentially controversial question. Where do you stand on tiled versus floating?
Just waiting for this one.
That goes right from the certification. If you're certified, you would always do tiled. When you start to break the rules, then you start to float.
How about you, Nara?
yeah, I can go either ways, man. Depending on how you create your stuff. Sometimes there is not enough. If you want to just fit everything in one screen, right? There is not enough space. You'll have to go floating. But like if there is more option where you have a scrollable scrollable visitors that's been built, you'll go tile all the way with automatic settings and stuff. So yeah, I don't have like just fix to one versus other, right? So both ways. With floating, you have more options of like what is it like you can create some magics with floating, like bring it up and bring it down and those kind of stuff. With tile, it's kind of stuck there. So we recently adopted this talent API features connected from Tableau, where we have this buttons created now, which again, like internally, there is this floating thing hidden, basically calls the Tableau talent API to make some calls and stuff. So yeah, it's purely based on use cases.
Yes, you can hide a lot more with floating.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you, Janelle?
I would say definitely tiled when you first start building your Tableau dashboard. And I think Nara and Lucy, you guys were saying that's a very similar thing here. It's like I always start with tiled, but then again, if you have these like weird customizations that you need to add, then the occasional floating object can be very helpful. I have ran into in the past where Tableau developers have done everything floating. And with server upgrades or different browsers, it can get really messy because some of those floating objects slightly move within your dashboard and end up overlapping other components, which can look really messy.
I'm going to date myself. When I started using Tableau, we only had tiled. So I had to go through the pain, and it still unfortunately is really painful. And it's been a long time since I was in a physical class with new users, but that dragging and dropping things and where they're going to land is not clear, and you can move your mouse a couple of pixels and it goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
So in some ways for new users, floating is kind of easier. And I totally get why a bunch of people go that way, because it lands where it is and it stays there mostly as long as you have a fixed layout, and there are the different browser differences that Janelle mentioned. And at the same time, tiled, if you're getting over that learning curve, then I find tiled, when I need to go back and edit something and fit something else in, tiled tends to work better. Because the Tableau doesn't have all of the grouping and layout controls that we get in a tool like PowerPoint, for example, or Keynote, to be able to render things. So yeah, so it's been some of my personal fantasy around that has been for Tableau to give us the controls of well, nowadays like a Figma or a Visio or even PowerPoint, as we're building out dashboards so we can get the layout that we want.
Yeah, a number of people are prototyping in Figma for Tableau, which I think is sort of interesting.
Yep, I've done a few with prototyping in Figma, and kind of my workflow, going to what you had talked about, Janelle, in your session, is I will sketch and wireframe usually on my iPad in drawing tools. So I'm just there. It's that way. It's not a piece of paper. It's something that I can share more easily. But doing that, and then if it's a bigger project, then I'll go into something like Figma to start, and I'll just copy and paste my sketches, or maybe I have a little Tableau view that I built as a proof of concept that I'll copy and paste that chart into Figma and do that, and then move into Tableau eventually.
I find it a little dangerous.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jonathan, I totally cut you off. You go ahead.
Oh, the thing I was going to say was, particularly when we're getting into some of the chart types where the data is not ready, trying to wrangle Tableau to get it to work right just slows me down when I want to be able to do fast design iterations.
And the danger too with Figma is that if you design something beautiful and interactive, but you don't have real data in there, people get very hooked on that prototype and it looks very high res. And then you move to Tableau and you can't replicate it. So I would always keep it ugly.
I know this is very, very specific to Tableau, right? So, but like, what other visualization tools that you guys look into, like say if Tableau is not really working out? Because we have the same issue with maps sometimes, like Tableau doesn't cut very well with a lot of maps, which is good. Sarah is going to talk about the maps the next time. So what other tools that you even like a second choice or something after Tableau?
Lucy?
I like to do sketches just in JavaScript, just code things and see how I can get them there. And then also I always have my eye on Looker, as Jack knows well, because I feel like Looker you lock down that semantic layer and then you have more fluidity. It turns out that Looker is not as fluid as it will be. So I have my eye on that development, and then I have a whole host of sort of like quick online JavaScript like data wrapper that I float little vizzes up in sometimes just to see what can happen.
Janelle?
I feel rather biased because I've only been working in Tableau for so long, but I know a lot of different companies are heavy on Power BI. I can't necessarily speak to how the map features are different in that though. And historically, I come from like a ClickView background as well. Again, I think there's been a lot of changes with that tool, but comparing like the layouts, it's more customizable, more that like PowerPoint feel as you can like drag in objects.
I'm kind of with you, Janelle, that Tableau is my main tool. So, and it's, but with our projects and our partners, and we're looking at kind of what's the best tool for the job for them. There's a number of cases where we're using systems that have some amount of built-in visualization, and using that is where we end up going sometimes, just because of the looking at the whole project holistically and what training or what data is available and things like that. And then as far as the other things we see, Power BI, I have not used Power BI myself, but that's definitely out there. And when people start looking at costs and things, Power BI starts looking good. And then there's the custom JavaScript and using somebody's API like Data Wrapper or something like that to build things. That's what we see. But we're more in the public health space, so there's not necessarily the funding to go out and purchase other BI tools.
And Power BI is not server-based, is that correct? So
there is a server.
There is a server as a separate add-on that people are using.
Yep.
So just one more note on the different layouts in Tableau. I did post a link to Tableau Public that has a bunch of different tile templates, which is really cool to see, especially for new Tableau developers. If you're just not sure like where to place those, that's very helpful.
Oh, and I wanted to mention one more thing as far as that we use, since we're about to transition to Sarah talking about maps, is Mapbox is, you can do massive amounts of stuff with styling for Mapbox. And so in that way, sometimes when it comes to that base map layer, we've loaded data into Mapbox to display it. Though Tableau's added so much in maps in the last couple of years, it's actually reduced the number of times that shows up. Though we do need to use something like QGIS to do the data prep for Tableau in cases. So we can't do it all in Tableau. So thanks everybody for presenting. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce to introduce Sarah.
Thanks, Jonathan. And now I think your question teed up Sarah perfectly. You know, I know
she's all excited now.
Yeah. So for years, everyone has been using Tableau for mapping, but there's always been, desire to do more. Have more than one or two layers, and so I think Sarah, we're very excited to have you join us. I know you're joining from the West Coast. Thanks for joining our early morning Tableau user group here in northern New England, and it's an honor to have you as a Tableau research scientist take over our next session here on visualization and spatial mapping. And with that, Sarah.
Okay, thanks. Let me shuffle some windows around and share a few things. Just share a screen. So my name's Sarah. I'm on the research team at Tableau. I've been there for, I don't know, 7 years, something like that. I don't know. I've been there a while. And my background's all in mapping. So I'm going to get to have a great opportunity to talk about all of the things that I love to talk about. And I'm going to go through a number of different topics from some sort of basic mapping and points that I think are really important anytime you're creating a visualization. You're thinking about the types of questions that people ask, and then show some of the newer features that we've introduced that I think make mapping a lot more engaging in the product and really increase the potential of what you can do. But before I start, I want to address this question of tiled versus float, because since it came up, I am firmly team tile and float. I tile all of my maps, like 99% of my maps are tiled and 99% of my legends are floated, because I hate a legend snapped to some corner of the visualization. So that's that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started and show some kind of cool visualizations, and at least I think they're cool, and talk a little bit about what they are, why they work, and some of the things that I'd like you to think about as you're creating maps that would be more effective for your data. So I'm going to start with this data set, and I know this is a little bit farther south than the northern New England tug. Boundaries probably crossed, but it's still, I think, a really interesting data set, and we'll find it in a minute. So this is from the Boston Open Data Portal, and they have a data set that they share for their 311 service requests. So if you're not familiar with the 311 service request type thing, it's where citizens can put in information about problems in the city that need to be fixed. So you get graffiti, potholes, leaky water pipes, things that people want to put in a service request to the city and have them come out and work with. And I like this data set because it allows for a lot of fun mapping opportunities. And it also gets at one of those core questions, which is, where is it? And how are things distributed? So we're going to explore that in a lot of different ways, looking at the mapping functionality in Tableau. So I'll start out just with how much data are we working with, so you have a little bit of context. It's a pretty big data set. I'm starting with 222, almost 223,000 service requests. So a lot of data. And it's actually going to turn out to be a little challenging to visualize it and really understand the patterns in the data. Uh, so when you're doing this, kind of anywhere you start with mapping, there's always that basic question of, where is the stuff? So let's start. I've created a point data set for this. I actually have latitude and longitude. So you can see I've got latitude and longitude over here on the left. But I'm going to go ahead and use this geometry for the 311 points. And is just because this is one of my it's a silly favorite feature in Tableau, but I love this feature, and it's just make point. And what that's going to do is it's going to take a latitude and longitude and turn it into a point geometry, which means that you can map it more easily because you can just drop one pill onto the visualization. But because it's a geometry, it also means you can do additional calculations with it in Tableau, because we have a lot of spatial intersections and they require a geometry. So you can longitude pair and turn them into a point. But since I'm here, look at this second part of the little help that comes up. So you can use make point on number, number, number. So number for latitude, number for longitude, and then this mysterious other number. Well, this second way that you can use make point, that third number is totally optional. But if you have an X and Y coordinate in projected units, and I get this a lot from open data portals, I'll download and it'll be like, here are my eastings, here are my northings, and it's in some local coordinate system. All I need to know is the spatial reference ID for that local coordinate system, and Tableau will do the projection for me. I don't happen to have that in this data set, but if you do work with data that doesn't come in as latitude and longitude, you can use that third number for your spatial reference ID, and it's a super, super cool thing because it'll translate it into coordinates to put in Tableau. So I'll just drop my geometry in there. Cool, I've got a lot of data points. I can start interpreting the pattern. I'll go ahead and drop my unique ID on, so every point will know, details, okay, I know which case I am. And it's cool, I get this huge blue blob because I have 223,000 data points. So what you can do with it, you can't really get any pattern from this visualization, but I can zoom in and I can start looking at some of the details. I know what streets points show up on because this is just the default base map in Tableau, but I don't have a whole lot of additional context. So if you aren't familiar with the additional background maps that we have in Tableau, we've got 6 different map backgrounds that you can turn on, whether you really want the satellite imagery version, so you want to be able to see this data with the Mapbox imagery, and that provides the context you want. Or for this type of data, one of my favorites is streets, because just out of the comes with a little bit more colorful detail, but also a lot of extra annotations. You've got points of interest that show up, you have building footprints, a lot of detail that you might want if you're looking at data at a fairly close in view, and you want some more context to make sense of distributions. But with this data set, if our question is, how are these 311 calls distributed around the city? Are there areas where we're getting more, fewer requests? You really can't get anything from this map because it's just a big blue blob. And so this is where you start thinking about ways that you can aggregate the data to understand the distribution patterns. So we'll look at it in our first way of aggregating. We're going to look at zip codes. And if you haven't done a lot of mapping in Tableau, you may not already know that Tableau has all of these geographic roles that it supports. So long as you bring data in that we can attach to a like city name, state name, zip code, area code, we can match those strings. You don't have to have the geographic file. Like you don't have to have a boundary file for zip codes. We can just say, oh, you tell me this field here is zip codes. I can just drop that on the map and see here are some approximate zip code boundaries for this data. And because I had zip code as an attribute, I can just drop my service request onto, and I can see a count for each one of these zip codes. There are 10,000 service requests right here. But maybe you've already picked up on a little problem that came up. I've got a legend over here on the right, and it tells me that the lowest value is 1 and the highest value is 48,000 and change, and that should be a dark blue. But I don't see any dark blue on this map. But I do have a little indicator down in the lower right corner that tells me that there's an unknown value, an unknown location. It turns out this data set has a number of null zip codes. So if I filter that data out, my legend is going to recalibrate. So now I know that the zip code with the most requests is 14,000, and my map is now showing that full range of colors. So if you ever see that kind of monochrome map that shows up and you can't figure out why you're not seeing the full range of data, always check to see if there are some nulls in your data, and it'll show up in that little marker down in the lower corner. But now I see of my data, and I can tell that there are a couple locations, maybe up here in this area, right over here. We can see that there are relatively more requests than other locations, but it may be that zip code isn't really the unit that you want. So we're going to look at neighborhood, because the data set happened to have an attribute name for neighborhood. So I can go ahead and take my 311 requests, drop it onto columns, and now I can see the count for the neighborhoods. And I'll just go ahead and get rid of those nulls because we don't really care about null neighborhoods. And I know which neighborhoods have the most requests, but I want to see that on a map. And the problem that comes up is, well, Tableau has a lot of geocoding data that it can tap into. You've got zip code names. We can match those to a map. We don't necessarily have every geography you might want. So neighborhood names are something that are often more specific to a local geography. But since Tableau supports all of these different spatial files, I can have a spatial file that has my geometry for neighborhoods, and I'll just drop this in. I'll map it really quickly, and I'll show you how this gets put together. So now I've got polygons for each of my neighborhoods, and this is my favorite, the null neighborhood that has no name. And then I can put my 311 requests on top of color, and I can see which neighborhoods have the most requests. And the pattern is slightly different than what I see when I map my data by zip code. Just for context, we'll just jump back really quickly. And some of that is because these neighborhoods have different boundaries and they're different sizes, but there are also some challenges in the data set that we're going to dig into. But so how did this get put together? It's really as simple as taking my 311 requests and joining it to my neighborhoods. So I got a spatial file, and this is a GeoJSON. I got it a portal, and I can just join those together and say my neighborhood name in 311 requests matches up to the name in my Boston neighborhoods GeoJSON, and join them together, let me use them. Great. So that's a really nice way to make a map when you've already got an attribute in your data set that tells you something about location. But what if we want to go and compare it to maybe some census data? And isn't just where is it, but where is it, how is it distributed, and how does that relate to attributes? Maybe I wanted to know about 311 requests compared to the median household income in each location, or the average household size, or some other data that the census tracked. So I might need to use census tracts for my geography, but I don't have anything in the 311 data set that tells me what census tract. So I'm going to fix that problem using a spatial intersection in Tableau. So I can go to, I went to the Boston Open Data Portal again, and it turned out they had an Esri ArcGIS feature service for this. So I wanted to show this because it demonstrates that you don't actually have to have a spatial file on your computer to do this kind of visualization. So this is coming from an open data portal. I don't actually have the file on my computer, but I can grab the shape, drop it on the map, and here are all of the census tracts in Boston. I can grab my GeoID, which is the identifier for each of those. So now each census tract knows where it is. And then I'm going to grab my 311 request count field, and I'm going to drop it on color. Oh, wow. That's a totally different pattern than what I got before. Let's just kind of do a refresher. Neighborhood distribution, zip code distribution, census tract distribution. When I first made this map, I was like, oh boy, this is really weird. And then I thought about, what is this doing that is different than the other visualizations? And what does this tell me about the importance of not just looking at one map? If you want to understand distribution of your data, looking at multiple different maps is something you pretty much always want to. You're going to find problems in your data really quickly. So this map is different than my neighborhoods and my zip codes because it's not coming from an attribute. It's based purely on location. So when I go back to the data source and we look at how this was put together, and it's going to take a second because I'm using a feature service, an Esri feature service for this. So sometimes it goes back out and it hits that service just to know, hey, where are you? Are you still there? Do you have any updates for me? But this is using a spatial intersection instead of an attribute join. So we're taking every point, and here you can see I'm using the make point. So I'm turning latitude and longitude into points because my 311 requests, it was just a big CSV file. There was no geometry in there at all. So I'm taking my latitude and longitude and I'm intersecting it with the polygon shape of the census tracts. And so that tells me that there's something weird going on in this particular census tract right here. And maybe we can find it. So I'm going to go ahead and use layering in Tableau because I love layers on maps. If you haven't used layers yet, starting in, I don't know, about a year ago, I can't even remember when it was. It feels like it's been so long. We added the ability to create multiple layers. So I can just drop this in and add a new marks layer. And now my point data is going to show up on top. And I'm going to zoom into my crazy tiny little little polygon that has all of these data points in it. And this is just like, I don't see 52,000 points in here. Maybe someone's seeing something that I'm not, but if I were just going to make a guess, I'm like, I don't know. There are like, I don't know, 1,000 requests that came in here. I mean, there just aren't that many data points. So I had to do some real digging to try and find the problem. And I'm just going to go straight to the spoiler, and I'm going to color code these data points by this field called is anomaly. And we're going to see one location that shows up. Now I've got my nice little orange spot right here. And to make it easier to select, I'm going to go ahead and disable selection on my polygons. And we're going to see something about this one data point. Because as far as mapping is concerned, this looks like I have 1 point just sitting there. But it turns out there are 5,258 items selected when I select that point. And what that is doing to my map is when I do any kind of spatial intersection with that, it is going to completely throw my data visualization, because that one census tract polygon is now going to get 52,000 data points that you're never going to see on the map because they're all stacked up on top of each other. So if I got rid of those, I'll add my anomaly as a filter here, and I will that truly are anomalies, and my map is going to rescale. So now I'm going to get a truer distribution of that data. But I would not know that there were all of these bad data points if I hadn't looked at the map in multiple different ways. So I did that by adding in a secondary spatial file, but there's actually an easier way of finding that sort of problem. You don't have to do a spatial intersection. So this is another visualization that I use all the time to understand distribution mark type. So I've got all of my point locations, and I can just hit the mark type and go to density. And this gives you what people often call a heat map. And what it's doing is it's looking for the relative amount of stuff in different places on your visualization. So that anomaly point shows up as this huge bright spot of, hey, there's a lot of stuff here. And there is so much stuff here that it just overshadows everything else on the visualization. And this would be another visualization that I've got potentially a problem with my data distribution. And let me zoom in, because I don't think I explained why I think all of these points are an anomaly. See if I have all of the layers turned on. Yeah, I think what happens is when they didn't have a location for the actual request that came in, I think they just assigned it to a default. And here's City Hall. So I'm guessing that this building right over here is probably something else very important and city-like. Hey, we didn't have a location, let's just assign it there because that sounds good. So if I turn my anomalies back off, I'll add that as my filter again, and we'll just keep all of the ones that are not anomalies. And then we'll zoom back out, and we will see that we actually have a pretty good way of looking at, kind of the relative intensity of cases. Where are we seeing more requests for 311 calls? Requests. And this is also a kind of a different pattern than we see with, say, the neighborhoods, where we get a much heavier request down kind of in this middle part of the city, or with the zip codes, where we see kind of a stripe of heavier requests, and with density, where we see that it seems like most of the requests are really kind of pegged up in this northern part of the city. So we're starting to see that different visualizations actually give us different patterns and tell us different things about our data set. So another way that we can look at the data that actually gives us some more analytical capabilities than we get with just density mark type, because the density mark type, while you can select data points, you don't have an absolute count in any location. But I like to use things like hex bins, because I can create this grid of little hexagons all over my map and then count up my data, my data into those hexagons. And again, my anomalies show up very clear here. I'll just filter those out again. So we'll just take only the ones that are not anomalies. And I'm going to see that same type of distribution. It's very similar to what I see with my heat map, but now for any given location, I can select this specific polygon, and I know absolutely within the bounds of this one polygon, I had 2,321 requests. Whereas with the density mark type, I could say, here is this big kind of try and sort of select things around that blob, and it's going to get a whole lot of points that are outside of that blob. It's just a lot less precise if you want to be able to create, absolute measures. So I don't have the example. I didn't open up the workbook for this, but one of the ways that I've used this for my mom, there's a 311 service request data set that I can get for the city that she lives in. And one of the things it tracks is scooters, and she hates electric scooters. So I with hex bins, and she could click and select all of the little hexagons right around where she lived and see the count of all of the scooter complaints that had come in, and to see if any of them had been resolved or not. So it was a very useful visualization for her, because she could say, I want this spot right here. She could zoom in, she could see the map underneath, she could say, this is the location I want, and this is the location I want, and now show me the visualization with just those data points filtered. So just to put all of these things together before I go to a next example, you can use layers in Tableau and look at all of these and compare them to one another. So here are my zip codes, and I can see the distribution with my zip codes. I can add my hex bins on top of it and see the distribution. And again, you can see my anomalies are on. So let's just get rid of all of my anomalous data, and we'll recalibrate all of the visualizations. And this will allow you to compare how those distributions treat your data differently. So we can look at hex bins, we could turn the hex bins back off if we want. And I can also, just to point this out, there's this map control widget. So you don't have to control your layers with the marks card, because if you're looking at this on Tableau Public or Tableau Online, or you're looking at it in a dashboard, you don't have access to the marks card. So we have this nice widget that you can turn on. And this is a floating widget, so you don't even have the choice of tile or float. I'll just throw that out there. And it gives you control over all of the layers from on the map. So if I want my zip codes and my density mark type, I can turn those layers on directly from this widget. And I could lock it down. So maybe I don't want anybody to be able to select anything based on the density mark type. I only want to be able to select based on zip codes. So you have some control over how people interact with the map and how they can look at the different visual that you've created. So we'll turn density back off. You can see the individual point locations on top of the zip codes. It's just a nice way of being able to explore and look at distributions. So that gets at, that is like the power review of like ways that you can understand this basic spatial question of where is my data and how is it distributed. But what I'm going to move on to is a bit of a richer spatial question, something that we've been working a lot on in the last few years on the Maps team at Tableau, which is making it so that you can answer more analytical questions and see your data in ways that allow you to think about how do these layers interact with each other. And so this is going to look at a lot of these new spatial analytics and new features. And the last workbook I use will actually, I'll jump over into the beta version of, actually, I think I might be using the beta for this one, the beta version that just came out, the pre-release of 22.1, which has some nice new features in it. So we're going to do a start with multi-data source layers, which are, they came out in the last release. So I think that was 22.4. And what that allows you to do is visualize data from multiple different data sources without having to join them together into a single data source. So I'm going to start out making a map, and we're land parcels in my new favorite town in Maine. So I'm going to northern New England. And I think Jonathan already knows that my goal was to troll him with this. So I'm going to drop some geometry onto my map. So I have all of the land use parcels in my new favorite town. And we're going to answer some analytic questions about this, because I've decided I'm going to move from Seattle and I am going to move to Maine, a state that I have never lived in before. I've never visited. I've never even been. It's very sad, but I have to go there because you've got a great national park that I haven't visited yet. So, okay, so I've got my land use parcels, and we'll zoom in so we can see a little bit more of the data. You know, it's a lot of data in here. And I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and put, I'll put my zone name on the tooltip so I know what land use zone these are. So I've got some commercial industrial, I've got some single family residential, and I went ahead and created a zone group. Put on filters. I will just select everything. And what I really want to do is I want to show this, because it got rid of all of the nulls. But that's okay. We don't need the null zoning in this town. So now we've got our building or our parcels. So I'm going to add in some zoning polygons. So I've got a zoning data set that I grabbed, and I just changed my data source. I've got tons of data, each separate spatial files, and I'm going to change to my zoning, and immediately Tableau thinks I want to blend, but I don't really want to blend, and it's going to get really smart about that pretty quickly, because I'm just going to pick up my geometry, drop it on as a layer, and it's going to say, oh, okay, you're not actually blending these data sources together, you're just treating them as separate data sources, and you want to map them both. So now I've got my new geometry, and I'll go ahead and relabel these just they don't get confusing. I've got parcels, zoning, and now with my zoning, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to color code those. I'll just put my zone name as a group, but my zoning is now drawing on top of all of the parcels, and I want those to show up on top of them. So I'll just drag my parcels up, and now are going to show up on top of the zoning, and I will fade the zoning out a little bit so it just kind of hangs out in the background. And now I've got all of my zoning polygons and all of my parcels. And let's just keep adding some more data sets because we can. Let's get building footprints because we want lots of detail about this location. Grab our building footprints. I'm going to take some geometry, drop on. I'll go ahead and drop on an ID field. And we're going to zoom in really close as soon as I label this. Footprints. So now I've got all of my parcels. I've got all of my building footprints. I've got all of my zoning. And I can filter these independently. So let's say I want my buildings. All I want for my buildings are residential. So I'm going to filter out all of the non-residential parcels. And you can see a bunch of parcels just disappeared. I'll turn it back on. I just turned everything off. Turn on all of my parcels, turn off all the parcels. Now all I have is residential, but none of the other data sets were impacted. So if I wanted to, I could add, I could filter out the zoning independently too. And to make it easier to know what I'm working with, I'm just a title here, and this is going to be my parcel zoning. And then if I go back to my zoning, I can add a filter for those. And let's go ahead and filter to just the residential parcels. And so now all I have are the residential parcels or the residential zoning polygons, but none. I can add all of these different layers. I can symbolize them differently. I can filter them separately. And that allows me to get, just the right context. So I can, here I've added in some extra layers here, just wanted to jump over just to kind of speed up the being able to talk about it. But I have trails. I'll make them darker so that we can see them. I've got trail data sets. I have building footprints. I have points of interest around the city that I can add in. Very important, I have microbreweries that I can add in. There are these nice little black circles that I've added here. Jonathan nicely pointed me to, other important points of interest around the town. And I can layer these up and filter them separately to get just the right context that I want in my visualization. And I can choose whether or not these are interactive. I mean, it may be that, I don't want to know anything about these. I just want them to sit there. And so I've got my zoning polygons. I don't want to put my cursor over them and see them highlighting all the time. That's distracting. So I can go in and I can disable their selection. So now they just sit there as a background layer, and I'm moving around the map and I don't have any tooltips on them that are showing up. I don't have any interaction. They really just become this nice background context layer that's adding color to my. So with any of the layers that you add in, you get that choice on whether or not people can select them and whether or not you have them on the zoom extent. So if I, let's just do an experiment. I'm only going to have my breweries or my brew pubs on zoom extent, and we'll see what happens. I'm just getting rid of everything. And what that's going to make it is so that if I zoom to full extent on the map, it's just going to zoom to the extent of the one data set that I care about. So this is just going to be my only zoom to brew pubs because that is clearly the most important part of any town. So it's nice that you can use these layers. We can control them with the layer control widget. I can turn this on and adjust the layers independently. But what I want to do is I want to start asking and answering some analytical questions. And so this is where some of the new functionality of the last year and change comes in. So we added features to create buffers around locations. Buffering point locations has been out for, I think it came out sometime last year, maybe a year or so ago. But with the 22.1 release, we've introduced buffering of line features as well. And so if I were going to move to my new town in Maine, one of the questions that I might ask would be, well, where is a good place for me? know is that I want to filter down, and I really just want to look at residential locations because, if I'm going to live somewhere, apparently I need to live in a residentially zoned location. And that's great. But going out walking and hiking is really important to me too. So I want to narrow down these locations that I might consider based on some sort of spatial characteristic that they have. And I've got this nice data set that shows me a trail, a set of trails through the town. Make sure that I am close to those locations. So we're going to look at our trails data set, and I have this layer that I've created, and it is my trail buffer. So I can take those line features and say, buffer out those geometries. So buffer the geometries on my trails. I want you to buffer a 1/4 mile because I've decided that that is as far as I'm willing to walk to get onto a good trail. And for anybody who actually meets me in real life, you will know that this is a gross underestimation because I am the sort of person that will walk many miles to get to an interesting place. But I felt like this was probably a good, reasonable human judgment on how far would somebody be willing to walk to get to their nice trail if they want to have it considered super accessible. So I've got my buffer, and I've already added it to my map, and I'll just turn this layer on so we can see it. And now I have these new polygons that show me that 1/2 mile or that 1/4 mile distance on either side of the trail. So now visually, I can see that if I want to be within a 1/4 mile of one of these trails, I need to be in one of the areas that overlaps these polygons. And now this is great visually, so I can see it. I could add this on as a layer in my map. I have it for context. But what I really want to be able to do is I want to use this in a spatial calculation. We're going to do some more in-depth analytics in this location, and then I'll show you how I built this up. So I've got my parcels, I've got my trails, I've got my trail buffers that I can turn on and off, and I have a couple filters that I've added in, and we'll just interact with the filters, and then I'll explain how these work to get us our analytical answers. So my zoning, I know that I want to be in residential, so I can just filter down, and that's just a straight filter on my data set. But I also want to be near a trail. And I've got a couple choices for this filter that I've created. We'll say true. And what it's going to do is it's now filtering based on my trail buffer geometry to be able to tell me every parcel that's considered residential that is within a 1/4 mile on either direction of that line feature. So anything where that buffer, that line buffer overlaps. It's kind of a fun note. I could also say, tell me all of the parcels that are at least a 1/4 mile away. So if I want to ask the opposite question, I can go ahead and do that. So we'll just keep all of our true parcels. Now, I decided that I don't just want to be able to live within a 1/4 mile of a trail. I also have to be very close to beer. So I went ahead and mapped my little brew pub locations as best as I could identify them, and I'll make those little glasses a little bit larger. I decided I'd uh, limit to those as well. And so I added a second filter so I can now get rid of all of the places that are too far away from a brewery. And I decided 1/2 mile was acceptable for that. And now I have a complete analytical answer of here are all of the locations in town that are a 1/4 mile from a trail and 1/2 mile or less from one of these breweries. So how do I put this together? Different than what I showed in the last example where I was just stacking layers on top of each other, but they didn't know how to talk to each other. So this is as simple as using the spatial intersections in Tableau. And as soon as this goes back to my data source pane, I'll show you how those relationships got set up. And hopefully it'll go back to the data source pane. If not, I will just talk through what happened. We have spatial intersections that support all sorts of different predicates in Tableau. And they can do polygon to polygon relationships, polygon to point relationships, polygon to line relationships. And it's really just a spatial intersection. So I have my land use parcels, which are polygons. I have my brew pubs, which are points coming from a CSV file. And I have my trails, which are lines coming from a spatial file. And I set up relationships between each of these. My parcel intersecting a buffer that I have created around my points. And I'll show you this. So I can just type in a calculation that's saying buffer the point geometry. And this is actually coming from a well-known text field. So this spatial file happens to be well-known text, which is a way of storing spatial locations as a text field in a CSV. And Tableau can now recognize that as geometry. So I say, buffer that geometry, 1/2 mile. And that gives me a polygon. And now I can look at the polygon to polygon relationship between those two files. Now take those parcels and intersect them with a 1/4 mile buffer around each of those trails. So now I'm using the new line buffering feature to look for all of those parcels that are where any part of them is within a 1/4 mile of the trails. And I can put those together and create filters based on those relationships, because every parcel is now smart and it knows exactly how far away from each of those breweries it is and how far away from the trail it is. So I want to show you one last example, and this is a little bit more of a realistic scenario, though I know that everybody wants to use Tableau to plan out where they're going to move. This is reminiscent of a problem that I answered a lot when back in the day when I had an internship at a city planning agency. So before graduate school, before working at Tableau, before working at a university, I spent some time working for city and county planning agencies. And one of the questions that I got asked all the time was, identify all of the properties that are close to this one place where we've just issued a permit or where we're going to issue a permit. And I'm going to show you 2 different versions of answering that question. So this is the what is nearby. So I want to be able to identify a parcel that's interesting to me, and I will just go ahead and click and select that. And now I've got that selected parcel, and I've got lots of different layers that I'm using. So we've got our selected buffer, we've got the centroid of our selected location, we've got our parcels. I can turn these on and off. But the main thing I want to know is, here's my selected location. What is nearby to this? Locations that are within 490 feet. And for any of them, I know that this particular parcel, the centroid of that parcel is 271 feet away. This one's 447 feet away. So I can use calculations in Tableau that uses the distance calculation. And the cool thing about this is it's also adjustable. So if I want to look at what's 110 feet away, I've got a parameter that is allowing me to dynamically change that search, and it's updating the chart next to my visualization that tells me something about the land use zone of all of the neighbors, the polygon types, what lot each is, how large any of these lots are. And this is using the the area calculation in Tableau, and then the distance to those. So I could select them and say, oh, tell me all of my neighbor parcels that are, I accidentally clicked on the wrong thing. Parcels. I wanted to show you all of the ones that were vacant, but I accidentally changed the selection. Let's find a new neighbor. Oh, let's find all of our parking lots. So here are all of the parking lots that are inside that selection. So I can combine my visualization telling me something about what's nearby that's dynamic with a chart that's interactive, giving me more details on those specific locations. And the way that this works is it's just a spatial intersection between 2 data sources, my parcels, and I'm actually joining them back to my parcels. And I'm taking the center point of each parcel, I'm measuring out from there, and then I'm using a distance calculation in Tableau to identify what is nearby. And since it's a distance calculation in Tableau that ultimately tells me what's nearby, I can use a parameter in that distance calculation to dynamically adjust it. Now notice that there are some little, weirdness with it. So for instance, this polygon that I'm highlighting right now, why is it not considered a neighbor? Well, it's not considered a neighbor because this calculation, to make it adjustable, I'm basing it on the centroid of each of the parcels. So the centroid has to be within the buffer in order for it to be selected. We'll just keep bumping this out. And now that centroid is inside. So you can see that buffer line just crosses over. A little bit of fudge around the edge here, because in order for something to be considered a neighbor, this is based on a centroid to centroid distance calculation. But since we've introduced polygon spatial intersections, so long as you don't have to make your buffer distance dynamic, you can have an absolute calculation instead. And so this will take that I select, have a set distance buffer. So this is a 500-foot buffer, and it will identify every polygon that touches that buffer. And so you can see with this polygon that I have my cursor over right now, even though the centroid of that isn't inside the buffer, which we would have needed in the other example, it's considered nearby because that buffer crosses any portion of the polygon. And it's dynamic as well. I can change which polygon I want to select, and it will go ahead and update all of the table information. It'll update the map. I can look at all of the vacant parcels. I can look at all of the parks that are close by. I can look at all of the R2 zoned parcels, which happens to be the selection. Here are all of my R2 zoned parcels that are nearby. It gives me that opportunity to explore the data in as I want, just depending on what other visualizations I've added in. And so those are all of the demos that I wanted to run through, because I think they give an example of a number of the different features that we've added into Tableau and ways that you can use them to answer some interesting analytical questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that I can see people again. And I think I've just stopped sharing. Hopefully you aren't seeing like lots and lots of versions of yourself since I've moved my Remo window back in front. But I am up for any questions that folks have, and it looks like maybe some have come in. So hit me with whatever you would like to know about mapping.
Yeah, that was
And if you
awesome,
want to move
Sarah.
to Jonathan's hometown.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll do another 10, 15 minutes of Q&A, and then we'll go to breakouts where we can talk more, and Sarah will be in that. But I thought while we had everybody together, we'd take a couple of minutes now. So that was awesome. And I love the progressive nature of kind of starting out with just plotting a couple of things and then going deeper, and showing the kind of analytics that we can do in Tableau with that. So kind of in that vein, where I know you have a big background in using other GIS tools, where do you find when do you need to go to a GIS tool? When can you do it in Tableau?
Yes, I do a fair bit of my work in Tableau. I mean, I do pretty much all of my visualization in Tableau, especially with the multi-data source layering, because I just drop stuff in there and it's so much less intensive than trying to do all of that setup in a geographic information system. The place where I go into GIS is really when I need to do serious analytics. I mean, even in Tableau, I do most of my basic. I want to know what overlaps. How do my polygons relate to each other? How do my polygons and lines relate to each other? Because I will tell you that unless you're going to throw your data into Postgres and set up some spatial indexes and do your analytics there, it is faster to do it in Tableau. Our maps team has spent a lot of effort into optimizing these calculations. So if you have any of your data, especially in hyperfiles, once we put your data into the Tableau spatial format, we have indexed it, we have optimized it, and we are ready to roll. I did some huge spatial intersections, like the let it run overnight on your computer kind of spatial intersections last week. And QGIS, a free open source GIS, told me it was going to take 11,000 minutes, which is, I think, kind of a long time. I don't know how long Tableau took to do it, but it was just sitting there. Yeah, it was sitting there waiting for me in the morning, because when I left my computer at night, I just said, hey, Tableau, do this spatial intersection for me. Go forth. And so when I do like serious spatial processing, if it's really just a tell me how things overlap and it's a calculation Tableau can do, I'll let Tableau do that for me. If I need to create new boundaries, like I don't things overlap, but I actually want two separate polygons if they overlap. That's something that Tableau won't do. If I need to work with raster data, so last week I did a bunch of raster to vector conversion, and I'm actually just going to be putting that on the Tableau community forums, maybe even today, maybe tomorrow. But if you work with land cover data, somebody had asked me about getting that into Tableau and doing some analytics. You can't do that in Tableau. We don't work with raster data very well, but doing some external processing, it's really easy. In case people do work with a lot of like kind of this, I need to do more stuff with spatial data than Tableau will do, and it's really a data prep type of thing. I've been writing a series of blog posts on the Flairlich twins blog. They're two of our Zen masters, and it's all about how to use QGIS, free open source, put it on Macs, put it on PCs, great software, how to use that to do processing on your spatial data to get it in a particular shape to use in Tableau. So there are lots of tricks in there. We can share those links if you're interested.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to copy paste right now.
We had one question, which was in New England, we have townships, and it would be great to add that to the available geographic options.
So that's for cities, the big I found with townships to get them to map is convert township to TWP. And that is often the trick to getting the name to work in Tableau for mapping, because we do have a lot of those townships. But one of the challenges with geocoding is it's all based on aliases. And so we have to have an absolute or a very close match to the aliases that we have set up for each location. Something that might help with trying to decode mapping and what will map in Tableau. Last week, I wrote a big blog post with a bunch of Tableau workbooks that go through all of the data that's included, or all of the common data that's included in our geocoding databases. So if you want to know something about what is mappable, what are the aliases that we accept for that, you can find that all in some of the workbooks that I just put up on Tableau Public. And I'll go ahead and grab that link and throw it into the chat as well.
I had missed that post of yours. That's awesome.
This might be the best thing I've done since I've been at Tableau, and I will find that post. Yeah, just put it on the community forums. It might take me a minute to find it, so
okay.
I'll find it before.
And also one thing for everybody to know about that is the Tableau updates the mapping sources regularly. So whatever version you're on, a later version will probably be better. Henry had a follow-on question. When I try to overlay township shape on my project shape files, it requires a blending field. How do I get around that? I can answer that one. If you're using 2021.4, it no longer requires any sort of blending to do that, because you can do map layers from multiple data sources. If you're using before 2021.4, then you really want to do some sort of a join or spatial join in order to, or union even, because we can union shapefiles now, to get around that. And it kind of depends on, do you want to have, like in Sarah's example, where you are clicking on a location and able to see locations around that, that's the case where you probably want to be doing some sort of join. Whereas if you just want to put both on the same chart, to do that sort of overlay visually, if you're on 2021.4, it's drag and drop. If you're on, I forget which version Union for shapefiles was introduced.
That was probably about a year and a half ago. I'm pretty sure that was one of our 2020.2. I'm just pulling that number out of nowhere.
Yeah. So if you're on some release, you can union two shapefiles together and then plot them both on the same thing.
2020.3.
2020.3. Great. Yeah. So
Jonathan,
there's some different ways to go at that.
So just to follow up, so basically in the recent version, 2021.4, so we can just like bring in all the, say, like S3 connection information and just like overlay, just like how we do it in GIS.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's the thing like we always had issues with.
Yeah. as soon as you change your data source, sometimes it makes it look like you're trying to blend, but as soon as you grab that geometry and drop it on as a layer, it's like, oh, you're not trying to blend. Let's just show you some cool spatial data.
So is there a limitation on layering? Because again, we were using 2021.1 or something right now. I think there's like only 3 layers we can put together. Is there a limitation with 2021.4?
Oh, you can do more than that even with 2021.3.
Yeah, but you got to do all that union jumbo and all those things, right? So
yeah, so I asked the engineers on the maps team as to what the limit was on how many layers I could have, and the answer is 2 to the 31st power minus 2. And the conclusion was that your computer will catch fire before you actually get to that limit.
Oh, that's good. So
because initially people are like, oh, there's no limit, and one of the engineers is like, well, actually there is 2 to the 31st power minus 2, and we're like, oh my gosh, yeah, no one's going to touch that. So yeah, don't put that many layers on your map. You'll hit a limit.
So 2022.1 is still in pre-release, right? You get the one that's out for public is 2021.4. Okay, we will try it out. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and the big change with 22.1 from a mapping perspective is probably the line buffers. So if you're using 21.4, you'll have point buffers, you'll have spatial intersections on like all of the combinations, points, lines, polygons. You'll have multi-data source layer support, but you won't have line buffers. That's really the main difference.
Thank you.
And I can say from having used map layers in practice, one of the challenges becomes performance. That in drawing that map, you might have like 6 different layers with filters involved, and the number of queries that Tableau is issuing starts getting to be an issue. So Henry asked, where do I find map data source from Tableau? Not sure what you mean by that. Do you mean if you mean the map data source that Tableau uses, you're going to need to go to Sarah's post on that data, the what's in Tableau geocoding that she just shared. And then for other map sources, I'm hoping some show up on the Tableau Exchange in the coming year. And then besides that, it's web searches, by and large, to find data. And for public data, going to whatever organization controls that data is really useful. And if you're looking more kind of globally, more for kind of random data sets, data.world and is one site that has a bunch of data sets. And there's also the Humanitarian Data Exchange, which is sponsored by the UN, and that's humdata.org. And I'll put those in the chat. Or places to find data. So Sarah, what's coming up for maps? Is there anything else you can share that Tableau's working on?
I'll just kind of give the general. We are always looking at ways to connect to new data sources. We're working on like authenticated Esri services. Right now it's just public facing Esri services. So if you're working kind of a little bit more behind the wall, being able to get into those authenticated services. And we're always doing improvements to our geocoding data so that we can things for everybody. We're working on, I call it buffer all the things. We buffer lines, we buffer points. So polygons would be a logical next. Really it's thinking about new ways to get people the analytics that they need. So if there are specific things that people feel are major pain points or specific types of analytics, folks feel free to let me know, and I will talk with the maps team and add them to our list. What are the things that our customers are really struggling with? Because that's how we decide what are the things that get prioritized. It's really all about what are the big use cases to help people do the analytics that they need to do.
Yep. I've got a few.
Yeah, I've got my pet things. You
Yeah.
know, we're looking at how can we add spatial into prep. You know, we can read
Mhm.
spatial files, but can we port over all of the analytics so that you can use Tableau prep for that?
Mhm.
You know, there are a lot of places that we're looking at how we can integrate spatial more across the product.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, one for some of my things around styling that I'm interested in, like
Okay.
getting dotted and dashed lines, for example,
Oh yeah, well yeah,
for
we'll talk styling. Yeah,
for
I always
doing
like to.
borders. Yep. And also working with labels, because there's times when we want to have labels as a layer
Mhm,
on top of other things, but then there's also where does Tableau plot those labels and does it make sense
mhm.
given different geometries, and being able to control that appropriately.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that. I've actually been helping some folks with
Mhm.
ways their labels in the right place when they want to reuse that data set all the time.
Yep. Yeah, we end up creating another data set that we load in to cover that. And also the imputing of locations that don't exist. So for example, I was working on a project evaluation dashboard of where their project expenses, and we have expenses that aren't associated to any location. They're global
Mhm.
expenses. So
Where do you put them?
imputing a location in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, for example.
Yeah, Null Island's a great place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it needs to be a little west of there because Null
Well,
Island
we can
is
talk.
too close to places where we work. So that's a GIS joke for everybody. In Sarah's example, there was that imputation of a bunch of 311 calls in Boston to near City Hall. So just kind of a default location. And in maps, 00 latitude and longitude is often a default location. And that plots just off the west coast of Africa. So there's a joke that it's Null Island. Yep. All right. So thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation and everything you've shared. And I love the Lego map on your wall. That's super cool. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce.
Yeah, I just want to echo, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining our user group here in Maine. We'd love to have you out, whether it's for a short visit or for a
Sometime
lifetime.
post-pandemic, I'm coming out. I'm collecting all the national parks. You guys are on my list.
That's great. Acadia
Cool.
National Park is great. It's a great place to come see. And I think, Jonathan, thank you again for hosting the sessions today. We're going to shift now into special breakout rooms. So when we go back to the room map, you'll notice some labels associated with tables. And Sarah, were you going to be at one of the tables for a period of time, or do you need to run?
I will be at a table in like 3 minutes. I'm going to go get another cup of tea really fast, but
Okay.
I believe there might actually be a table with my name on it
Great.
that said like Sarah and Map stuff. So I will be looking for a table like that as soon as I have another tea.
Great. Well, thank you again, Sarah. So are there any other questions before we break out of this main stage room and go to the specific tables? All right. So with that, thank you again for joining the Northern New England User Group meeting today. Love your feedback. We'll certainly look to schedule another one of these in the upcoming months. And I would like to encourage everybody to stay and mingle. Pick a table, stay and mingle. So with that, thank you, everyone.